Joining me on the line right now from UBI Works is Floyd Marinescu, and he and I are going to be talking about Bill 273, which is a bill that is partially through the second reading. It actually hasn't made it to committee yet, as Floyd was just telling me. Floyd's the executive director of UBI Works and the CEO and co-founder of C4 Media, which provides software development, news, and learning events serving 1.2 million online. InfoQ.com and 8,000 attendees annually via QCon conferences in San Francisco, New York, London, Beijing, Shanghai, Sao Paulo. Floyd is an angel investor in over a dozen startups and has built teams and businesses in Canada, the U.S., China, Brazil. This guy is an international builder. This is it. This is a guy who walks the walk, in my humble opinion. And Floyd, I'm very happy to have you on the show. And what we're talking about is something a little different. You know, a lot of people in this country, not the majority, by the way, but a lot of people in this country are born, with some money. Families have money. People come from wealthy families. Some people come from backgrounds that are, upwardly mobile, and, they don't have to worry about things like, income insecurity. But the vast majority of Canadians do worry about income insecurity. They worry about housing insecurity. They worry about food insecurity. And that's why I think this conversation is just so important, Floyd.
Yeah, it reminds me of what you just said. It reminds me of a Milton Friedman quote that the role of government is not to make sure people end the race at the same time, but start the race at the same line. And that's what basic income does. It ensures equality of opportunity, so everyone has a chance to make it in life, everyone has a chance to pursue their potential, and no one's held back by material constraints or unsafe environments or just the luck of the draw, how and where they were born.
It's interesting because, of course, Milton Friedman was hugely popular in the late 60s and 70s, and a lot of the Social Security safety nets that have been built by governments, Scandinavian countries, for instance, they looked at that formula and they said, yeah, I think that's something that we can make work in our country. We were doing that a little bit in this country for a while, and then we kind of changed. We started to go with Buchanan's notion that society is a construct, and there's no such thing as society, as Margaret Thatcher used to opine. And I mean, we saw in the late 70s and through the 80s and even to the present day this sort of erosion in society, or in the concept of society, and I think that is a huge part of how we ended up where we are right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, even Friedrich Hayek, a libertarian icon, was for basic income, as Milton Friedman was. And Friedrich Hayek's point was that we shouldn't allow any one group to become so vulnerable that they could be exploited by others. And I bring up these very right-wing examples to underscore the point that basic income is not left or right; it's forward. Mm-hmm. And to illustrate that, this is also it's as much a liberal as it is a conservative idea, and there's also MPs in the NDP who are for it. This is really something where I think we could have a political compromise to have a greater society.
Well, Hugh Segal, Hugh Segal and his idea of a basic income. I mean, let's look at Hugh Segal, who OC, Ontario CD, Canadian politician, political strategist. He was part of the Bill Davis government. Later, he was in Brian Mulroney's government. Very conservative guy, and yet, as he's written several books. Bootstraps Need Boots, for instance, one of his big ones. In Defense of Civility, a couple of other great books. But he was really one of the architects of Ontario's Universal Basic Income pilot project that the Wynne government brought in.
Absolutely. I mean, UBI is not socialism. UBI is money. Money moves markets and helps markets work more efficiently. If everyone can participate fully in society, we'll have greater productivity, greater economic growth, and everyone will be better off.
Well, I made the point of mentioning your resume a little bit there, talking about your role internationally and some of the things that you've done. And you are a strong advocate for bringing people together. That's what I've seen. As an angel investor, that's one of the things you have to do. You got to be able to bring people together, to bring people onto a common path, as it were. How difficult has it been to take people down this UBI path, Floyd?
I have to say my work in this nonprofit world is way harder than it was running my business. It's way harder because it seems like every month the team at UBI Works, we're doing things that are completely new. Running a business is much easier by comparison. We're just kind of repeating the same thing over and over again, mm-hmm. and trying to do a little bit better than before. But our focus has been on creating a movement from the bottom up. So we have the number one social media channel, 30,000 Facebook followers, we have 60,000 email followers. We're trying to create an activist movement, a movement of people that will effectively make it impossible for the parties to not run on basic income one day. Because at the end of the day, I see basic income, I'm always seeing it through an electoral angle.
Right.
And this is an election issue. It will require raising some taxes. It's not something a government can just do by itself, at least without probably committing political suicide. I think someone has to run on it and actually win. So we're focusing on building the groundswell and the support that will de-risk support from any of the parties in the future, and I think we're doing really well in that, and I think it's just a matter of time. I'm very confident there will be a basic income in this country at some point in one of the first, second, or third elections to come from now.
Yeah, I would like to see it. I would like to actually see it happen before there's an election. We have a bill currently pending in the House, Bill 273, which was introduced by Julie Zurowitz. Introduced first ever bill towards a national guaranteed basic income. The bill entered second reading on June 14th of 2021, and that's where it sits because, of course, Parliament rose.
Yeah, that's unfortunate timing.
What is your opinion of this bill, Floyd?
You know, a lot of some basic income advocates were a little disappointed that it's not calling to just do a basic income, but what the bill does is address the actual core issues that are holding back a basic income from happening. So it is addressing the government to create a strategy with the provinces to answer the question, how would we actually do one? Because it would require federal and provincial cooperation to some extent. It does call to support a pilot, I believe, and there's a lot of interest right now in PEI to do a pilot. This is the first ever bill in Canada, and although it's not directly calling for a basic income, I think it's the first step to clear the way for a basic income and keep the conversation alive in the government and in the media, which is why we went full throttle to support this bill. We were part of a small committee that helped advise on the bill, and I was really glad that this was a bill that reframed basic income as actually good for the economy and good for innovation, because at the end of the day, every government, every politician is accountable for economic growth, and we were able to link basic income to that, and it's not only as a social program, because it is so much more. It is a form of economic infrastructure as it is a dramatic improvement in the social quality of our society.
Oh, absolutely. And as you said very early off, it gives everyone a level playing field, right? Some people have, better shoes, but, at least everyone's got shoes. You know what I mean? Yeah. Somebody might have really expensive shoes. You might be wearing Jimmy Choos with the red sole, or you might just be wearing, a good, comfortable pair of shoes. But you got a pair of shoes, and you can at least start the race at the same. Everyone starts out of the blocks at the same spot.
Absolutely. Well, during the Ontario Basic Income pilot, there were a number of stories of people who bought their first ever winter jacket, people who, for the first time, were able to eat vegetables.
Wow.
I mean, if people can't afford the basic necessities of life, they can't participate in society, not even to a basic level. We have to make sure everyone can at least participate in society. We have more than enough wealth in this country and around the world to afford this. And we spent a lot of time looking at methods of paying for it, and this is very, very doable. It can be paid for without costing the middle class and without harming economic investment. In fact, it would improve economic investment, and that's been validated by research at this point.
Well, I think that's been validated by what we saw during this COVID-19. With the CERB, the CEWS, the CERB, the CERS, or whatever. There's so many programs that were created. I think there were like 7 or 8 programs created by the federal government in order to ensure that the economy was still sustained while we were going through what is perhaps the worst economic situation in a century. And it worked. We saw, I know small businesses here in my community of Cobourg that actually saw an increase in revenue. So people were spending more money. People had more money to spend. They were spending more money. But of course, the flip side to that is a question I got from one of my listeners is, all right, so now everybody has more money. So the landlords are just going to jack up the rents. The cost for everything's going to go higher because, of course, if people got more money, then we can charge more, right?
People having a little bit more money, especially in the lowest incomes, does not change fundamentally the supply and demand of people looking for rent. I think some of those claims our concerns are valid, but are not founded. At the end of the day, basic income. We had the Canada Child Benefit, which is one of the world's largest basic income-like programs, and it did not cause inflation. In fact, it caused economic growth. I remember in 2017, Stephen Pelosi, the governor of the governor of the Bank of Canada at the time, had said that actually Canada was leading in GDP growth across the G7, and he claimed it's mostly because of the Canada Child Benefit as a stimulus measure, and basic income would provide that at all times.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've seen it with the basically basic income for seniors, right? The guaranteed income supplement for seniors in Canada. So we have a guaranteed income already at a certain threshold. It's like Canada's doing it, but we're doing it in piecemeal.
Absolutely. I think we just have to get over this human bias that helping people of a working age with money is somehow wrong. Actually, it's great. We've seen over 105,000 people in more than dozens of studies in the last 50 years had basic incomes and kept working. There's no evidence of a decline in work participation, except in some cases by a partner in a marriage who's staying to take care of the kids, working slightly less, or teenagers staying in school longer. These are all social goods and things that we should want in society, given that these days people are, again, working harder and longer than before and getting less in return.
Yes, I think that's really what the big concern is, right? People working harder. I mean, I know people working 2 jobs that are still not able to keep themselves above water. Part of the concern is, a minimum wage. I spoke to a woman recently who is a community service worker, and, she went to the full courses and everything like that. And when she first started working, she was making the same money as a fry cook at the Wendy's. So, I mean, so you've gone to school, you've incurred a massive debt through student loans, you're trying to find a job, and they're not even willing to pay you a living wage, which in most places in Ontario, it was like $21 an hour.
Yeah, and this is, bigger picture here. We've studied a lot what's going on with automation, like technology is my background, and what we're seeing a pattern is that we literally already automated so many jobs that we have an issue with underemployment across the G7, across most developed countries. We have people with university educations that are taking jobs that used to go to people with high school educations, which is pushing down wages and making everyone a little bit poorer. I mean, automation is not something that's coming. It's already here. And in fact, in this pandemic, recessions and crises are a trend accelerator. And we saw dramatic adoption of various forms of software and hardware automation, so much so that in America right now, GDP is now back to what it was at pre-pandemic levels, but with 10 million fewer workers, and the same ratios are almost applying to Canada. GDP is almost fully recovered with hundreds of thousands less workers as companies have fully automated. And what happens with automation and technology, it always ends up in the end lowering wages because more people are competing for fewer jobs.
That's right.
And in fact, the educated people are taking lower skill jobs. And this is a real problem. We have a pandemic of low pay. So in some ways, what CERB and some of the basic supports have done have given people the opportunity to actually seek better work, to bargain for better jobs, and has caused what some people are blaming as a labor shortage is actually a wage shortage. And when you see a labor shortage, economists declare a labor shortage when they see fast wage growth. So it's only labor shortage if incomes are going up, which is a good thing. So people are able to actually go back and get better pay than before in some cases. And that's obviously a societal good.
Well, and to that point, I mean, even if people were so now the government's providing a guaranteed basic income, people can work for those lower wages then. People don't need to have, 18 or 21. Basically, the government is subsidizing the wages then of those employers is also how some people are looking at this.
That some people think that's going to happen, but I don't really buy into that because, again, what we're seeing with real-life data right now across North America is the opposite, is actually people are, in some cases, able to switch industries to better pay. So some people in the leisure and hospitality industry, they actually have to pay more to attract workers. So we're not seeing that people are being subsidized in their labor. We're seeing the opposite. We're seeing that people are actually getting better jobs, and jobs that are lower quality are having to improve the quality of those jobs. So I actually don't think that there will be any sort of subsidies of corporations. That's the wrong way to look at basic income. If anything, what you could say that basically will be subsidizing is jobs that are actually not being compensated in our current pure market system. Jobs like caregiving, jobs like community service, jobs like social work, jobs that simply don't pay enough. Like those are the kind of jobs that, frankly, we want to subsidize because those types of jobs are adding value to society beyond simply making money for corporations.
Well, and those are also jobs. I mean, you make a really good point because it seems the jobs that are the most important in terms of societal constructs, social workers, PSWs, people working as health supports, people working in social services in particular, though, like not just workers, but people who work in admin and those places like that. I mean, those are very important jobs. That's a hugely important role, and yet it's undervalued. I mean, we have that. Absolutely. I think that's a huge problem in our society in general. Is a lot of the work is undervalued. To your point, though, you made a really interesting point a moment ago. We're going to take a quick break, listeners. But the point you made a moment ago was that we are almost back to where we were economically before the pandemic, and yet because we're seeing companies with their their revenues increase and all of that, but they're not bringing back the workers. The point you made a moment ago, unless I misunderstood what you were saying. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want the listeners to think about that aspect of it, because basically, as you said, we're having a recovery, but it doesn't seem to include everybody.
Yeah, it's called a jobless recovery.
It's happened
every time.
Exactly. We're having a jobless recovery. Same thing happened in 2008, 2009, listeners. My guest on the line is Floyd Marinescu. He is with UBI Works. He is the founder and CEO of C4 Media. He's the executive director of UBI Works and the CEO and co-founder, as I say, of C4 Media. I'm Dave Glover. You're listening to Canada's only holistic political chat. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back, everybody. Floyd Marinescu is on the line. The jobless recovery. Can we talk about that a little bit? Because I know there are industries here that are trying to find workers. There are still lots of places around here apparently hiring. How does the jobless recovery affect workers? I mean, we know that the economy seems to be bouncing back, but what about workers? I mean, how demoralizing can it be, do you think, for workers when they see this happening? They're being left out. It's as though people have made plans and they didn't include them,
Well, the last several major recessions we had, the term jobless recovery refers to how long it takes for the same number of jobs to be rehired back once the recovery has happened. And if you look at the last 30 years, after every recession, it takes longer and longer and longer. In fact, we hadn't even finished recovering from 2008 by the time the pandemic hit. Mm-hmm. And that was like 12 years later. And a big reason for that is technological automation. We now have software that can practically think, we have robotics that cost less than a minimum wage worker that can do the job of like 5 people. Like, this is the new reality. There's a lot of automation out there, and as I mentioned earlier, recessions are a trend accelerator. And what COVID did is it was a rapid modernization, with all of us moving to e-commerce and online shopping, and a lot of companies having the requirements to automate to survive, because they were facing a crisis. When you're in a crisis, you make the hard choices. Mm-hmm. You lay off a lot of people to survive. You adopt automation that's been sitting around maybe for 5 or 10 years, but you didn't have the urgency to do it before. And that's why it takes a lot longer to hire people back after a recovery. And people who don't have the right skills for the new jobs, or simply just not enough good new jobs, they end up being unemployed for a long time, or accepting lower pay jobs than they had before. So that's the one big thing, if the readers take away about this whole automation and basic income. It's not that robots are going to take away all jobs, it's that we're going to just have a lot of low pay and low quality jobs. And we can already see that in the numbers over the last 10 years. We're shifting to a two-tiered society of a lot of low income jobs and a fewer higher income jobs. And that is not a society with the middle class. That's not a society that can maintain a stable democracy. And that's why basic income is so important, to restore pathways into the middle class and ensure everyone can participate fully in society and frankly have a share of all this amazing wealth we're creating, at least to the point of being above poverty.
Well, and we don't want there to be a permanent underclass. I mean, that I think is a hugely important thing. One of the quotes I read a lot is from Alan Greenspan, and he talked about how they purposely kept wages to the point where, I have come to understand from watching Greenspan and others at the Fed in the U.S. that the goal was always to destroy unions, organize labor, to keep the wages as low as possible, because people who were precariously employed didn't do things like go on strike. They didn't do things like demand higher wages. They were so concerned about losing their job that they just basically kept their heads down and worked. And Greenspan basically said, he testified to Congress, that was essentially the plan.
I had no idea, but that is deeply disturbing, and please send me those links.
Oh, I will send you those links. Yeah, this is where and I use the term corptocracy because, do we have a government? Are we a democracy? Or are we living under corporate rule? And when you see things like, some people making headway and other people at the very bottom just not getting any, and there really hasn't been any real wage growth at the bottom for probably a generation, Floyd.
That's right. I was running my software tech business for the last 15 years. I wasn't really following economics or following politics that much either. And my angle was mainly from technology and just seeing the impact that it's had on reducing wages and creating this permanent underclass, as you said. It used to be that a blue collar worker could feed a family and on a single income, mm-hmm. and have a decent life, and that's just not the case anymore. And a lot of economists who have studied the issue have said it's mainly due to technology. Unions, of course, were a major factor, but even unions have lost leverage to technology and globalization, which is itself a factor of technological advancement. So we're in this world where, like, if you don't have a super high education, it's unlikely you'll get a high-paying job, and that's not the way it was. So I get really angry when I see people opposing the idea of basic income who during their time just had it way easier than millennials do today. Millennials today are in big, deep trouble. They're not going to acquire nearly amount of wealth that their parents and grandparents did.
Well,
something's got to give.
That's a really strong point, because and because I read a piece a little while ago about growing up working in the 70s and 80s, right? So guy gets out of high school at 17, he gets himself a decent job, it's a full-time job, he's able to buy himself a car, he meets his girl, he gets a couple of bucks more. He's starting to, we're talking about people who are making just a little more than the minimum income at the time, able to do things like buy a house, to raise a family, to save money to send their kids. Back in the 1970s, people on average had huge amounts of money in savings. Savings was a big thing back in the 1970s. So I think a couple of things have really pushed this to where it is now. Easy credit, the abandonment of collective labor, because of course unions were being destroyed. The offshoring of work, that's the easiest way to get rid of a union, take the jobs away. And automation, more and more automation. And it seems like the hard scrabble guys, not everyone can go to college, right? Not everyone's geared for academia. A lot of people are more tactile in how they're going to earn their living. And it seems as though those types of jobs are sort of going the way of the buggy whip.
Well, I think basic income will allow those types of jobs to come back in a more artisanal fashion, in a more bespoke fashion. And these are actually the words of Mark Carney. He did a talk a couple of years ago about the fourth industrial revolution, which is what we're going through right now. Mm-hmm. It's an industrial revolution. And he's saying that labor is changing so fast, automating so much, that we need to prepare by having the ability for people to afford education at any stage of their life, to have the income support to go back to school and retrain. Mm-hmm. We need a new form of income redistribution system to account for the fact that we've had so much rapid automation and people need support during times of transition. So if you look at the bigger picture here, technology is supposed to make our lives easier. But the problem with technology is that while it frees you from work, it also frees you from income. So the solution has to be income without work. And that's what basic income does to a small extent. It's a way we can all share in the gains from technology and realize the benefits of all this incredible development humanity has had. And if we don't do that, then, in that same discussion, Carney was warning that this is the kind of unrest, the kind of inequality we have today usually leads to revolutions.
Yep.
Or much worse. And I'm really worried. I think we're on track to tremendous social unrest, and basic income might be probably the best thing we could do to actually make people feel like they're part of a story of an economy that's improving everyone's lives and giving everyone a chance to achieve more in life, and instead of just working check to check just to survive. Or what's actually been happening is the way people are meeting the same lifestyle as their parents and grandparents' generation is just through debt. It's not that it's easy credit, it's that there is credit and they have no choice. You have to go into debt to maintain a reasonable quality of life, and that to me is a sign of a dysfunctional economy. True
enough. Absolutely true. Well, that sounds remarkably like socialism, though, Floyd. And that's the big dilemma. Got Pierre Poilievre saying things in the House like, we should be focused on getting people back to work, paychecks, not free money. And I want to read you this quote this is the quote from Alan Greenspan. This is in 1997. He said, this was actually Noam Chomsky who said this. He said, when Alan Greenspan was testifying before Congress in 1997 on the marvels of the economy he was running, he said straight out that one of the bases for his economic success was imposing what he called greater worker insecurity. If workers are more insecure, that's very healthy for the society, he says, because if workers are insecure, they won't ask for wages, they won't go on strike, they won't call for benefits, they'll serve the masters gladly and passively, and that's optimal for corporations' economic health. At the time, everyone regarded Greenspan's comments as reasonable, judging by the lack of reaction and the great acclaim that he enjoyed. So this was 1997, his testimony to Congress. That tells you right there that the people at the bottom, the people who are providing for the wealth. Let's look at the reality there, right? The people who are working for minimum wage, the people who are working in the factories, those are the ones who are giving value for the shareholders, for the investors. That's where the value comes from. That's your business too, right? And the reality is those people are the ones who are providing the value, but they're not getting any benefit.
Yeah, well, I was going to university during those years, so I was kind of in some ways raised within that maybe neoliberal type of environment where I was told that, hey, make a lot of money, make a business, charge as much as the market will bear. I don't know there's anything wrong with that. In fact, there's not a lot of things wrong with that, but we do want an inclusive economy that is actually everyone feels like they're benefiting and improving their lot in lives. And we are at a stage now with the technological automation that we have achieved that it's going to be impossible to achieve that if we don't find a way to also offer at least a basic income so that people can pursue their potential, seek better work, and do what I mentioned earlier that's been happening now is people are actually able to negotiate better wages. So I think there's a growing collective consciousness around the fact that these stories that we're living in now are just not working for us. The economy is not working for most people. You have people like Ray Dalio, the famed investor, saying capitalism is not working for most people. Something's got to give. And I think there has to be a positive story people can feel a part of and feel hopeful for, or else we are leading towards a future that could lead to revolutions, lead to right-wing dictators, lead or populist dictators rather. Like something's got to give. And despite the rhetoric on the House floor, none of the parties are really offering anything. Like both the Conservatives and the Liberals are saying we're going to create 1 million jobs. Well, 1 million jobs is not enough. It's not even a drop in the bucket compared to what's been happening to the vast majority of workers who are living check to check. We need something more. There's more than enough wealth creation. There's more than enough productivity that we can afford at least a basic income so that everyone can actually pursue their potential, seek better work, seek better pay, and we can survive this thing called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is a very dangerous time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think one of the other aspects that we need to start thinking about too is local economies. Keep bringing your economy back to a little more local. One of the things I used to talk about when I was running my business was the idea of global local, bringing, a global theme and getting them at a local level. My guest on the line, listeners, is Floyd Marinescu. We've been talking about a universal basic income. I'm just ecstatic to have you here, quite frankly, Floyd. I don't even know why I felt like I had to say that, but I did. We're going to take a quick break here. And when we come back, more of my conversation about a universal basic income. Look, as we said, it's not about a handout. It's about a hand up. It's a head start for everyone, listeners. It's a head start. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. Well, I got a caller online, Floyd. Got one caller online who's asking, okay, well, basically it sounds like we're talking to a politician here. How do we make this happen? What is step one, and where do we go? I mean, it's all great. Sorry, Ed, I just hung up on you. It is all great to say, we need this. It's going to do this. It's going to do that. But how do we get here?
All right. Well, I have no involvement in politics, but I am good at marketing, and I think it's a good idea. So I am marketing this idea. How do we do it? Well, I mean, the federal government could actually do it unilaterally. Even without the province's engagement. I mean, literally, it can be done through the tax system. It's called a negative income tax, which was Milton Friedman's idea, where we raise the funding for it. We can actually start to place a minimum income in the tax code. People who make less than that amount can get a top-up, and then the top-up actually reduces slowly as earned income grows. So in some ways, it's also a raise for lower-income workers, because 2/3 of people in poverty are working. That's kind of crazy. How could you be working and in poverty? So obviously the stories we tell ourselves about how jobs are supposed to work are not working. We need something more. So that could be done. And we're actually working on a study right now with some economists to show that you can pay for basic income without costing people who make under $100,000 or even under $150,000 to have an increase in taxes. There are ways this can be done by taxing passive wealth gain. We all know the extreme wealth inequality that's been happening in Western countries. There are ways you can do it even without a wealth tax and all the kind of controversy around that. So this is very doable, but realistically, it would involve cooperation with the provinces, and this could result in a huge cost savings for the provinces, which can redirect money that used to go to welfare programs into paying down debts or into improving the services in other ways. So this is a very achievable thing. It would just require the political will.
And I think that is really the biggest issue here. I mean, a lot of people have questions as to how would it work? How is it going to happen? How do we do that? And as you've just outlined, it could be done immediately. They could introduce, as you say, a negative tax code a negative tax in the tax code. Chrystia Freeland could have introduced it in their 2021 budget. She really could have just done it. I mean, let's look at the fact, listeners, that, for instance, the Canada Child Benefit, that was introduced unilaterally. They just did that. When they first introduced the first baby bonus in this country, same thing. The government just decided this is what we're going to do. So we know governments can do it. But as you said, it's going to take political will. How do we get that political will to manifest itself then?
It would actually add a lot of efficiency to the way government works. A lot of people are on social programs, not because they need to be there, but because they just need financial support. And they have to jump through a whole bunch of bureaucratic and very undignified and shameful behaviors and practices to get the money help that they need. So all that would be reduced, and social programs could be better focused at actually helping people with in a way that actually is more meaningful than just cash.
And social workers could actually be social workers, not just accountants.
That's right.
You know, I mean, most of the time that I've had to deal with a social worker, it's been that. It's been about jumping through the hoops for funding. It's for, did you qualify for this? Well, you could have qualified, but you didn't do this or this. I mean, instead of making it easier, to your point a moment ago, they make it as hard as humanly possible. And I never understood why that was the case. Why do they make it as hard as humanly possible? Are they hoping not to upset a certain political element? I mean, because again, there's a lot of pushback on this. A lot of people are like, well, people should just work for a living. This idea of just free money from the government, it just doesn't seem reasonable. And, these are people who've worked for their whole lives, older people perhaps, people who are already in a successful career. They don't have any idea. Like, I spoke to a gentleman recently who was, 1970s, hard Scrabble guy, bought a house with his wife, they raised their kids. And he's all about, why are we giving all this free stuff to people? And I said to him, well, when you went to college, because he went to George Brown back in the day, I said, how much was your tuition? And he told me, and I said, well, that's like, that's not even on the same threshold as what tuitions are right now, right? So, what we've done is we've got one generation, or probably two generations, not my generation, but the one just ahead of mine, for instance, and I'm 55, who basically were given all kinds of these benefits through government programs that were introduced in the 60s and 70s. And then through the 70s and 80s, fought it like the devil to make sure that money wasn't going to be wasted, because they were hoping to have a nice retirement.
And people in the 70s could save up for 5 years to buy a house. Now
Exactly.
It takes 25 years to buy a house. So it's just a different ballgame. These days, if you're high school educated, like you are having a really hard time in this economy, just making ends meet. Even people with university educations having hard times making ends meet. We are in an automated economy. In the 70s, like, there weren't personal computers, there weren't cell phones, there weren't industrial robotics that could, if you go to the Tesla factory in California, it's robot arms everywhere. It's not hardworking people. This is a whole different ballgame, and it's really sad that there isn't more empathy from the older generations to create a country that is actually making it maybe a little bit easier for the next generation. This is not what we want. We want to leave the world a bit better than when we started.
Well, we always hear that. You hear that all the time. Well, people should, and I, we speak to people, first generation Canadians who came here and worked their tails off. And I have a good friend of mine whose father was a bricklayer. He still is a bricklayer, actually. He's like very old, still laying bricks. And he, because he said the reason he was doing that was so his kids wouldn't have to. He was trying to create a better future for his kids. So to your point, why wouldn't we want to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. But mainly recognize the problem. Like, we are in a problem that wasn't present in the 70s. Like, jobs aren't working for a lot of people. People have to use debts, have to work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is not a sane society. That is not a decent society that existed in the 70s and 80s. The economics that existed then do not exist now. People are working in poverty. That's not okay. The basic income was a good idea when it almost passed in the U.S. Congress in the late 60s, and it's a good idea now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, again, so now I guess really what we need to do is get people to your point, you're a marketing guy, to light a fire under the butts of the people who are in fact going to have to do the work, the people who are going to have to introduce the legislation, the members of parliament, the parliamentary secretaries. So, I mean, you can go on the UBI Works website, listeners, ubiworks.ca, basic income bill, and sign the petition. That's one of the first things I would suggest you do. Maybe follow them on Facebook. But as I always like to tell the listeners too, read the bill, read the legislation. Bill C-273 is what it's called. It is currently, and I love the chart you guys have on your website. So it had first reading February 22nd. Second reading was June 14th. So it hasn't even made it to committee. I was under the impression it had already gone through committee and was at the report stage. It hasn't even entered the committee stage yet. Now, why do you think it's taken so long for this bill to even just get to second reading?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm kind of new to this politics thing, and sometimes I wonder if how much support there really is. But there's a lot of competing priorities in the government, and I don't know, it's just taken this long. It was a private member's bill by an individual MP, a really amazing woman, Julie Durwitz. This wasn't a government bill, so it moved at a different speed. I hope this gets attention first things first when the House reconvenes in September.
So, listeners, I want you to, if you're so inclined, to go onto the website, ubiworks.ca, and sign the petition. And once again, I'm going to ask you to write a letter to your member of parliament. And please write a letter. That's what you can send an email. Emails get deleted. Letters all get read. Somebody has to open the letter, right? Somebody has to open it. Someone's going to read it, and it's going to get read, and it's going to get shared, even if it doesn't make it to the minister. So you don't have to focus on the minister. You can send letters to the parliamentary secretary. You can send members letters to the head of the finance committee, okay, who I believe is Wayne Easter right now. You can send letters. Send letters. It's not so cheap to send a letter through snail mail anymore. But the bottom line is, we've got to let them know that this is, in fact, an issue. It's going to be an election issue whenever the election might happen. When we come back, Floyd, I want to quickly touch on this idea that we're having an election and whether you think the basic income is going to be swamped by that notion. My guest on the line, Floyd Marinescu, listeners from UBI Works. I'm Dave Glover. You're listening to The Drive Time. This is Canada's only holistic political chat, and we will be right back.
UBI for a while, and in my opinion, this is the most comprehensive report dealing with the situation, with the way to finance it and the implications.
When we talk about expanding the middle class, lifting people out of poverty, can we do kind of a trickle-up theory where you will actually grow the overall economic pie, and the folks who are being taxed will also do better?
And that's what we're seeing within the numbers is that, and you're right, the term trickle-up is essentially occurring.
We are looking at what are truly large numbers in terms of the impact from a potential UBI or guaranteed basic income scheme.
It's enhancing the overall ability of the economy to grow and therefore productivity that will enhance everybody else standard of living. That's why I think this report is important.
To justify or to argue for basic income is not about economic growth. It has its own justifications. What the report is showing is that the economic growth that it could spurn could exceed its costs. And when we talk about sustainability, we're talking about can the government actually balance its books over time by supporting a basic income? And the answer is, it appears to be yes.
Certainly from the research I've done, in every pilot study ever undertaken, it does not undermine people's willingness to work. If anything, it actually improves their ability to get a better job by retraining or upgrading their skills in some way.
Another benefit is it allows lower income households, it provides them with stability and therefore the ability to actually invest in themselves and take on more risk. And we both know that the economy is based upon risk taking.
I believe that the rising income inequality, wealth inequality in Canada is the number one issue facing our society.
Alrighty, so that is just a clip. Thanks again, Floyd Marinescu on the line. That is from the new report, Basic Income Can Speed Up Canada's Recovery and Grow the Economy. So who you're hearing from there are the Deputy Chief Economist from the Scotia Bank, the Chief Economist from CIBC. You're hearing from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. All of these people talking about the benefits. Even Amanda Lang, listeners, talking about the benefits. When I saw that Amanda Lang, because I watched Amanda Lang for a little while on CBC's Powered with O'Leary there, and frankly, after a while, I couldn't watch it anymore. I just get so mad. So to hear Amanda saying, you know what? Yeah, this is a good thing. I mean, how it's almost like a no-brainer for me, Floyd. I mean, where do we go from here? What's the next step? How do we make sure this is an election issue? How do we get people fired up? How do we get people on board so that the political will is finally brought to the fore?
Yeah, I mean, first I just want to underscore a little bit from that video you played in that report. These were preeminent economists saying that it would grow the economy, increase productivity, and almost anything government does needs to be justified on economic growth grounds. So UBI Works funded the Canadian Centre of Economics Analysis to take a look at what impacts would this increased cash flows from the bottom up have on the economy. And they found that it would create 600,000 jobs. Whether short-term or long-term, depending on which scheme that was evaluated in there, would add $80 billion a year to GDP. That's as much as the pre-COVID tourism and hospitality industries combined. That's a lot of jobs, a lot of economic growth. And how would it do that? Because more money flowing from the super wealthy who are not spending it, not investing it, in part going to people who will spend it in their local economies, means more money flowing to the local auto mechanic, the local barber shop, the local grocery store, and all this money flows upwards into the economy, inducing businesses to sell more and thus to hire more, and it makes the economy overall just work better. So I see basic income as a form of economic infrastructure that solves a major gap. If we don't do this, it's leaving money on the table. But this major gap is that we shouldn't have anyone living below basic needs. It's a prudent program. This does not take away from work incentive, and is a much more efficient and dignified way to replace various forms of social welfare and enhance other forms of social welfare. So these economists were saying this is good for the economy. So it seems like a no-brainer, but at the end of the day, I'm coming into this with my business acumen and my sort of marketing acumen to try and de-risk and create deal with the biggest objections people have. And one of the biggest objections people have is working people shouldn't have to pay for other people who can't work. Well, an important response to that is, first of all, it doesn't have to cost even the middle class to pay for this. This could come from primarily the top 5% of earners, the top 1% come from the financial sector. We have a problem with financialization in this economy where money is being rubbed together to make more money instead of actually invested in growing business. It can come from these sectors. We're actually studying that right now. We'll have a report coming out soon. So we can actually improve the economy by taking money out of the financial system and putting it into the real economy that creates jobs.
Well, exactly, and that's where the money comes home to roost, with the real economy. As I said, local businesses here in Northumberland County saw actual increases in their revenues because they saw people with more money. That was money going directly into the economy. Even the financial accountability officer for the province of Ontario said that the province was going to see an increase in their tax revenues this year because of CERB. In the federal government, the same thing. The parliamentary budget officer said the same thing. It's not going to cost them nearly as much as they thought it was because of the direct impact on the economy. Listeners, my guest has been Floyd Marinescu. He is the executive director of UBI Works, a not-for-profit organization that is out there to get the message that UBI works. It really can and does. He's also the co-founder of C4 Media, which provides software development, news, and learning events, serving 1.2 million online and on infoq.com. Floyd, thank you so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure. We're going to take it to the top of the hour, listeners, with Marty Stewart. Too much money at the end of my month.